What was considered as normal fashion changed dramatically from 1960 to 1979. This was a time where many fashion traditions were broken. As teens began to experiment with clothing and push the limit of what was socially acceptable from them, tradition began to change, and once changed, it began to spread across the world, creating a ripple effect on teens in society. But fashion wasn't the only thing that began changing at that time, but it was also the models wearing and promoting the clothing. What was considered as attractive to the eye was also redefined. The population increased dramatically after the Cold War, as large numbers of babies were being born when surviving soldiers returned home between 1945 and 1960. As the baby boomers began to grow up, many businesses adapted their products to suit the teen lifestyle in order to make sales and money, this leading to the increase in fashion trends and designs. Before the 1960s, fashion was dull, lifeless, uncomfortable, and very modest. Skirts were generally below the knee and included stockings. Fashion trends were usually set by famous designers, but as the population of teens increased, they used their voices and their bodies to set the trends. As a result, designers started producing clothing more suitable for teens. The 1960s and 70s brought a new, exciting way of expressing yourself through your clothes. People were dressing in wild prints, fluorescent colors, mixed, matched, and floral patterns, experimenting with anything they could get their hands on, as they had never had the chance to do so in the past. During the 40s and 50s, women's curves were celebrated in fashion. However, by the 1960s, women were praised for a slim figure. How the people viewed women in according to their appearance and abilities began to change as women began to protest for workplace equality. Throughout 1960, many feminist movements took place and continued on into 1970. Women were expected to follow a path, marry early 20s, have children quickly, and devote themselves to being a housewife. Women were handicapped, and by protesting they made their point clear. In 1964, Representative Howard Smith of Virginia proposed to add a law that would prevent gender discrimination into the Civil Rights Act, and the law passed. This has made a lasting impact on today's society because without the voices of these women and the difference they made, women's rights would still be discouraged. Mary Quant, born on the 11th of February 1934, was an asset to the fashion world in the 1960s. Quant contributed to the youth fashion movement as she designed famous garments such as the miniskirt and hot pants. She embraced the changing times and developed a new style, and she encouraged young teens to dress to please themselves. However, skirts have been creeping up the knee since the 1950s. Quant decided to take a risk and take the skirt to the shortest it's ever been. Women were able to freely move and even run for a bus. Her risk paid off. Still today, the miniskirt is a legendary design, one that can never be replaced. Jean Shrimpton, considered as the world's first supermodel, was another important person in the fashion world, as she helped launch the miniskirt. Her body shape went against your average model, as she was thin with long legs. This led to her nickname, the Shrimp. Shrimpton played a part in one of the most famous fashion controversies of all time, her day at the Victoria Derby. She arrived wearing a white shift dress designed by Colin Rolty, which ended 10 centimeters above her knees. This was considered to be a very revealing dress. She wore no hat, stockings, or gloves, and also a man's watch, which was considered unusual at the time. Shrimpton was unaware that she would cause such a reaction in the Melbourne community and media. Because of her decision to wear a shift dress, a shorter one than socially accepted, she empowered women to also do so. And after that day, the miniskirt and shift dress popularity skyrocketed higher than ever before. Early 1970s fashion was a fun era. It kept some of the basics from the 60s and perfected them. Some of the best clothing produced in the 1970s perfectly blended the mods with the hippies. Pants with flares were fading out and instead became tighter fitted. This was the first full decade in which a woman could wear pants in every walk of life. By the late 1970s, the pantsuit, the leisure suit, and tracksuit was what the average person was wearing. Colour almost completely disappeared by 1979. Earth tones, greys, whites, and blacks were back in and more popular than ever, as people had become tired of the super bright tones of the early 1970s. Fashion made its mark in the 1960s and 70s and dramatically impacted the people. The change in fashion allowed people to freely express themselves with how they dressed, adding a new aspect to their identity entirely. The young people wanted something new and to break away from old rules and traditions and strive for the unknown, letting curiosity take over. For the first time, every young person could set fashion trends. Previous generations didn't like what they saw. Things were changing. As they held tight to tradition, this shocked many people. As time went on, women dared to show more and more skin, and eventually it wasn't seen as rebellion, but instead accepted as normal. In conclusion, fashion trends have changed immensely over the years and are still changing today. 1960 and 70 fashion was much more than the clothes worn, but instead a fashion movement. Fashion gave the people a voice, and those voices were heard loud and clearly by many.